November 6, 2011, the Lifelines to Healing campaign launched in New Orleans, Louisiana, at the Household of Faith Church, with over 3,000 people of faith gathered to help amplify the need to end mass incarceration, gun violence, and ensure we have opportunities for young people. We're going to reflect for a few moments with several of our loved ones who were there in those earliest of days to help remind us as we walk down memory lane of the very important journey of Live Free through the years. Dorsey Nunn, he is the director of All of Us or None. Tell us a little bit, Dorsey, of some of those earliest memories.
The earliest memories I have was when Michelle Alexander wrote her book. She gave me a rough draft of her first copy of her book, and I knew that it was going to be substantial in terms of the new Jim Crow and all of that. And I called Michelle and asked her, how do I actually distribute the book, particularly in the Black community? One of the things she did was to refer me to a strong person of the cloth, and she told me to call Michael McBride.
Yeah, and I remember that conversation. You called me out the blue, and I had never met you before, and you said, we got to bring this woman to the Bay Area. And me, you, and a number of clergy from the East Bay Lane Caravan, Dr. George Cummings, and we packed up the St. Paul AME Church. Mm-hmm. And we had this amazing conversation. But it was there that I learned about your work and All of Us or None. And I'd love for you just to share a little bit about the legacy of All of Us or None as it relates to the way criminal justice reform in 2009, 10, 11, nobody was really talking about this. I know everybody's talking about it today. But you all have had some seminal moments for incarcerated people helping to lead this effort. Can you just share a quick reflection on how does it feel a decade later to see a lot of the work that you all have helped to lead go national?
You're the second person that asked me this question in the last 14 days. And I'm trying to, because the success of it has been tremendous. Right now, in terms of just the Ban the Box effort, 267 million people live up under jurisdiction where the box have been banned. Just last year, when we passed voting rights for people on parole, every other major issue that we fought for in that year lost, except for securing the rights for people to vote there. All of Us or None and the proliferation of it at this particular point is probably 32 different chapters around the United States, 12 within the state of California. And when we went out and started, we weren't building a nonprofit. We started out talking about we was building a movement. Mm-hmm. So the whole part of the thing was the movement part. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when I think about it, I can recognize that God is good, because that's a long way from the point of serving a life sentence in San Quentin to having the privilege of actually struggling around issues that are of paramount importance to the community that you was raised in.
Andrea Marta, we started off this journey, a lot of us together. We started off as organizers in local federations. I remember many of our earliest conversations of having to address shootings that were happening in high schools and neighborhoods, not mass shootings, shootings outside of our schools. When you think back to that work, the earliest days of Lifelines and our attempt to address gun violence, what comes up for you?
I think there's two things that come up for me. One of them is that I got into this work because of a drive-by shooting at the church that I grew up going to. And so it was never in my wildest imagination that there would be $5 billion in a federal pot of money for folks to transform communities and stop gun violence. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing that I think about is, are the families, and well, I'll say two things. The fact that Lifelines to Healing and Live Free is unapologetically centering the folks that are most directly impacted by this. So the fact that Candace Yifru and her mom Karen and Sherry Costa and Mary Schlarb and all of these folks from a small community in Dakota in Union City could come together to try and stop, what was really becoming sort of a weekly, if not every other day occurrence of one of our families losing our babies. And so to imagine where you have taken this to this point and where we are, it's just amazing to see. And I remember those early days of not always knowing what we were doing.
Really?
But always knowing how to make some trouble.
We was following the force, for real. Remember our conversations together, yourself, myself, Dr. George Cummings. I think of people like Father Jesus Nieto here in East Oakland. What's my man in Camden?
Pastor Higgins.
Pastor
Wiggins.
Hayward Wiggins.
Yes, sir.
And we all were in Washington, D.C. fighting for healthcare reform, and we all, I think, had buried a teenager within the last 30 days. And we said, what's the point of fighting for healthcare if our young people can't grow up to access it? And so we all launched a number of efforts, and there were organizers all across the country: Flint, Michigan, Camden, New Jersey, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 10 cities here in California. You were one of the first organizers of that. You remember it? And what stands out to you? Like, we had some big convenings.
I mean, what stands out to me, I think one of them is the first victory that we saw, which was in Union City, where we won $4 million over 6 years. We'd never seen that much money in our lives.
We thought we hit the lottery, $4 million.
And we got to put the Boston 10-point plan into action. We got to do a lot of other pieces that were really new at the time. I think those convenings, the thing that I remember the most is the power of the leaders that showed up in those spaces and the clarity that they had of what they wanted and how they wanted their communities to look. And the boldness that they took into meetings with everybody from local city council members to, we were just talking about that event at Pastor Berrier's church where we had 3,000 people chanting at some federal officials to get some money to places where they needed to be, to going with Dorsey and other folks to the White House to try and push for the ban the box policies. And so those are the pieces that I remember. And I also remember how new it was. Like we were bringing a message that folks had not heard before. They oftentimes weren't ready for. And so a lot of the prep was a lot of prayer and being clear about the anger and where it was coming from and sharing that with folks.
Ben, we look back over the work and, you've really helped to anchor a lot of the California work, but you also helped to kind of mainstream a lot of work around belonging and rebuilding a beloved community through storytelling and narrative. Talk a little bit about the importance of that work as we reflect over the last 10 years.
Our work was primarily in the beginning really focused on the realization that a lot of our loved ones were not included in the circle of human concern. So we were fighting to change systems and structures so that we could ensure they actually could belong. But the more we passed laws, the more the people who we passed laws against were seeking to change those laws once we passed them, and we would get wins, but we still couldn't actually get the kind of change that we were wanting to do. And so I think the evolution of our work has been the notion of how do we not just change systems and structures, but also how do we have strategies that influence and change hearts and minds, and how do we do that at the same time? And I think, it prepared us to be positioned in moments like what happened in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, to be positioned to say, actually, we've already been working to bridge across difference, whether that's been our ability to sit at tables with Pookie and Ray Ray that didn't want to sit down with a bunch of square, preachers, or to sit down with the police when we didn't really want to sit down with them, but somebody had to sit down with them, or else they was going to, continue to terrorize our communities. Or what does it mean to actually sit across a table with people of different ideologies and race? And so I think our work to work with loved ones has continued to inform the ways in which we need to widen the circle of human concern for everybody, but still doing so in a way that really is rooted in deconstructing anti-Black racism.
So I'll start with you, and I'll ask all y'all just as we close out, what's your one big hope for the next 10 years of the work we seek to do in our communities? If maybe not one big hope, but what's a big hope?
My hope is that we can actually change people's minds to believe, and when I say people, I mean Black people particularly, to actually believe through our action that our loved ones are worth saving, that they are not someone to be feared. I mean, we've been saying for a decade, you can't help somebody you're afraid of. And so what I would love to do is to change the consciousness that has been so imbued in the American consciousness that darker skin and Black skin is something to be feared. And I think if we can convert people to see each other differently, it'll open up capacity to relate to one another in very profound ways.
Andrea, what's a big hope for the next 10 years of the work?
I mean, what I know about this 10 years of the work is that people are literally having material consciousness change in their lives. Like, we can point to kids in Union City that were caught up in what was going on in the streets that now own homes and have jobs and are raising kids. And so my hope for the next 10 years is that material consciousness change are real for the folks that we're trying to work with.
The great Dorsey Nunn.
I don't know if I'll be around 10 years. So my greatest hope is to build infrastructure, because it's a protracted struggle. So the next generations of organizers will have a base that they can work from to continue to fight for the generations that follow them. So the thing that I'm doing right now is building infrastructure to engage in a fight that's a protracted fight. That's how come I established the Freedom and Movement Center. And so as my birthday is on December the 4th, I will turn 70. I've been at this work for 45 years.
Wow.
So at a certain point, I need to train the next generations of people who sit in the seat that I currently occupy, because they got a right to fight for the vision that they're gonna live up under beyond me.
Great job, y'all. Woo, touch your neighbor. That was good.